I'm Jess Sargus, high-performance speaker, certified mental performance mastery coach, and your guide to mastering your mental game. I went from Ivy League trained attorney to undefeated MMA fighter and back again. Now I help high achievers in any field live with fierce agency, deep alignment, and the power to win consistently when it matters most. You can do it all when you train your mindset, energy, and focus like elite athletes. That's why this is the Legal Athlete Podcast, where each week I use neuroscience, performance psychology, and real-world battle-tested strategies to help you unlock sustainable excellence, bold decisions, and the courage to show up each day as the badass you are. Green light. Let's go. Welcome back to the Legal Athlete Podcast. I'm Jess Sargus, your host, and today I am thrilled to welcome Liam Burnell, performance psychologist and behavioral scientist at MindFlick, one of the UK's leading applied sports psychology organizations. Liam leads research on psychological adaptability in high-performance environments, a critical capability for teams and individuals navigating change in both athletic and corporate arenas. At MindFlick, Liam helps translate elite sports mindset training into everyday leadership and team development. Their Spotlight platform blends performance psychology and psychometric profiling to boost adaptability, self-awareness, and resilience.
Wow, that's an intro and a half. I quite like that. That's no pressure for the next kind of 45 minutes.
Well, I'm sure you're going to live up to it. Just a very brief summary of all your immense capabilities. But let's back up a little bit for the audience. I'm so happy to have you here, Liam. What does psychological adaptability mean to you in practice?
It's a great question, and it's one that I've been researching for probably the last 6 or 7 years now. And really, it is that capacity for people to be able to recognize what is needed in the situation they're in, and then responding in a way that really helps them to be effective. And I think the key thing that we've been really exploring in our work at MindFlick is that when we talk about adaptability, often it's in the sense of being very reactive. So if we think of the COVID pandemic, we think of big events that happen, we talk about the fact that we adapted, like our businesses adapted, or we adapted, or we did something different. And adaptability is often used in that premise. I think the key thing that we've been really interested in and have been working with some of the best athletes to explore is actually that intentional proactive adaptability. And when you talk to them, it's about not as much reacting, but more about, right, I'm about to step into this situation. What does it need for me to be really, really effective? And that's kind of where we've started, and we've been really exploring how you do that. What are some of the things that go into it? And how can it help you to be really effective in the environments you're stepping into?
I love that. I think that it lines up with one of the techniques that I use with a bunch of my clients as well. Took this from my mental performance coach, Brian Kane. It's the E+R=O method, which is event plus response equals outcome. And, working with athletes, that visualization can be really effective in pre-planning responses to potential events. And so that's where, having already set a plan, it's much easier for you to adapt in real time. And you're like, okay, this is scenario A, or this is scenario B. This is how I'm going to respond, and go. It's really exciting.
I think that's the thing. And it is that pre-planning. You speak to so many of the world's best athletes, and I've had the pleasure of working with many of them. You do get that sense of we are going to, they often call it like a pre-mortem. We're going to pre-mortem whatever we're stepping into, to really understand, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. The really interesting part, and I remember speaking to one of a gold medal winner at the last Paralympics, and they were talking about some of the things that go into adaptability, and really kind of putting themselves in the shoes of, I'm going to need to adapt at some point today, and I might have to adapt in a way I'm not expecting. And that ability to then give themselves that pause when that situation comes. And we like to call it the Ted Lasso question, because he asks it so well. Like, what does this situation need? So giving yourself that pause and going, what does this situation actually need? And then executing that in line with how you like your abilities and your natural skill. And I think sometimes that takes courage. And I remember another person I spoke to once said that, like, the key to adaptability is being humble enough to know that what you normally do isn't going to work here, but then having the courage enough to do something different. And I think that's so true, because sometimes to adapt means to do something that's well outside our comfort zone, something we don't know is going to work. But actually, if we get it right, it's going to move us closer to that goal that we're really going after.
Absolutely. I think it's key, particularly in moments under pressure, right? Like if we don't have time or outcome pressure, it's much easier to take that step back and say, what does this moment require? When you're in real time and you need to make a decision, taking that moment, and in our mind, it could feel like 10 seconds. Really, it could be a fraction of a second to take that moment. So what is needed now? It makes such a huge difference in outcomes. And I think courage is a really important part of it. I think also allowing yourself to be calm enough to be creative. Because when we're too anxious in the moment, we have our brains shut down in the way that creativity is shut down. And I recently shared a story on LinkedIn about a moment where I had to think creatively about what was required. And it was not something standard. I was in my first fight, my first mixed martial arts fight. And I had gone into the fight thinking I'll probably, do a lot of striking. I was known as being heavy-handed in the gym. And so that's where a lot of my planning had went. But there was a moment in the second round, I had her on the ground and I saw the opportunity to set up an armbar submission. And so I started to do it, and she was kicking me and keeping me from doing what I decided that moment needed. And I thought very creatively, well, how do you stop someone from using their leg muscles to kick you? You punch them in the thigh and give them a Charlie horse. Is that a standard MMA move? No, it is not. But it was what the moment required. It paused her long enough for me to set up the submission, and I won by submission a few moments after that. But it would just, I was allowed to be calm enough in that moment to think what is required and then to think outside the box. And I think that particularly in sport, but also in business sometimes, or negotiations, thinking outside that box and taking the moment to calm yourself and think what is really required here is so key.
Yeah, and I love that story, because I think it just sums up like that. And that phrase, calm enough to be creative, I've just scribbled it down. I think is such a cool phrase, because what tends to happen, and this happens to everyone, no matter who you are, like when we do feel under pressure, and that could be a tiny bit of pressure, like feeling a little bit rushed, or suddenly our to-do list has got a little bit long, or I'm slightly late for a meeting and I really need to kind of get there. The physiological response to the body actually stops us from adapting. Like, our brain is wired to stop us from adapting under pressure, because cortisol gets released into the bloodstream. Like, it narrows our focus, and it does that because there's a part of the brain called the hippocampus. Like, the cortisol actually stops the hippocampus from sending signals forward to the prefrontal cortex, which is there trying to go, basically, do something different here. So when we're under pressure, that's going on, stopping us from adapting. And so that moment of calmness or pause or quietness, whatever you want to call it, is super, super important, because it just allows us to kind of take a breath and ask that question, like, what do I need to do here? And we often use, like in sport, one of the things that we talk about is similar to some of the things you've spoken about there, is like the 7-second cure. Like, we know actually the emotional response tends to happen probably about 6 to 7 times faster than the logical response. So actually giving yourself that time, letting the pressure kind of delve down, so it doesn't just put you onto autopilot, and then going, right, what do I need to do here to be effective is super, super key in any walk of life, whether that be whether you be on a sports pitch or whether actually you're in a boardroom about to give an important presentation. Like just asking that question in your head can just ground you in, how do I want to come across right now?
And is that the process? So just asking the question and giving yourself 7 seconds, or is there something else that you have people work on in the 7-second cure?
I would always and it was interesting. Like in over January, I got the opportunity to go away with one of the England teams to a World Cup, and it was something. The 7 seconds was something that they really, really liked because it was something really simple that they could kind of communicate on the field. But it was literally a case of if you noticed a teammate kind of starting to freeze up or starting to maybe go into a mode where it is clearly pressure that's playing on them, like that little whisper of 7 seconds and that ability to just take a breath, kind of ground yourself, and that even just focusing on your breath, it starts to get you present, starts to kind of help you process the emotion that's going on. And I think that's key to then allow you to kind of go, right, what does this situation need? I don't think you can go straight into what does this situation need. I think there's a little bit of a 1-2 there. And then that what does this situation need, that requires a little bit of a framework, and that might be something that you've done in a pre-mortem and you've got a planned strategy already in place, or it might be kind of a framework that you've developed. And one of the frameworks we developed at MindFlick was around mindset, and actually kind of asking that question, what mindset do I need to be in right now? Because we know that there are different mindsets that people can access, and actually if you look at our model of mindset, which is based on a model of personality called reinforcement sensitivity theory, all the mindsets have benefits, but they have benefits in different scenarios. So actually asking that question, what mindset do I need to be in? How do I need to view this situation in order to really get the best out of myself? That's super, super important. And I think if you've got that framework where you can kind of go, well, actually, I need to be a bit more like this right now, that's really helpful rather than just kind of winging it and making it up as you go along.
Absolutely. Having a framework or just simple concepts that you can return to, kind of like, a mantra or even a worry stone, that ground you back in that present moment so that you can be as effective as possible rather than thinking about what just happened or what might happen, but what needs to happen now is such a key part of performance on the field or in the boardroom or anything like that.
I think that's it. And it's that ability to have that framework and know that actually I've done that before. So like when you speak to the top athletes, they don't just adapt in the fly. Most, like, you see it playing out in front of you and you go, how are they doing that? Like, how are they just pulling that out of thin air? But actually that's because it's something they've practiced. Like, it's something that they've either done before in training or they've experienced in another game. And they've got that framework there to kind of go, right, I'm going to do that today because that's what's needed. And I think what we often forget is that we don't often see the hard work that goes into some of the great performances. Like, you think of some of the great speeches, or you think of some of the great sporting achievements in history. Like, all of that takes preparation. And I think it does go back to that preparation and then being calm enough to then really go and execute once you know what it is you want to achieve. And along the way in that execution, you are going to have to adapt. I think that's a reality. Actually, adaptability is probably the norm rather than the exception. Being able to recognize that is super, super important. And knowing what your goal is then going to allow you to do that adaptability really effective. I think if you don't have a goal, you might freeze more often. Actually, if you're really clear on, I'm going in this meeting today to do this, or I'm going out on the pitch today to win a gold medal, that gives you a real goal in mind, which then you can kind of go, is the thing I'm doing moving me toward my goal, or is it moving me away from my goal? And if it's moving me away from my goal, I probably need to do something different.
Absolutely. You said something that I'd love to circle back to about confidence. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about the role that preparation plays in developing confidence, and digging a little bit deeper, not just I've prepared for this so that I'm ready. But I think, particularly when we're dealing with a situation that's unexpected or something that we haven't necessarily planned for, having someone who has prepared over and over and put the practice in does enormous things for your confidence as an athlete or as a professional. Not only because you've done hard things before, so you've got that mid-cingulate cortex that's been developed through that hard work and that grit, but I think also not having to question whether you've put in the work gives you confidence to try something. And another thing, particularly you see it in athletics, but I think also it's a bit of an entrepreneurial mindset, is that you've practiced enough that you've failed a lot. And you understand that trying things and having confidence that you will continue to keep trying doesn't mean that you're confident you're absolutely going to crush it every time. It means that even if you don't crush it, you know that there's always a next step and that you can continue, because that's what you've done in your preparation. You've failed a lot to get better, and you know that one failure isn't the end game. It's just another maneuver on the field. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about the role that kind of preparation plays in developing confidence and being able to have that calmness under pressure.
Yeah, I think confidence is a really, really interesting one because I think if I spoke to 95% of the execs or the athletes that I've ever worked with, if you asked them what's the one thing that I could give you that would really help you, they'd probably say confidence. And it's like this mythical thing that no one really knows what it is, but it's this feeling that we have inside of us that allows us to move forward. And there's some really great research out there by the sports psychologist, the England football team, Kate Hayes, who just won the Euros over in Switzerland, which is super, super cool. And her PhD was all around confidence and how we grow that in athletes. And I think there was a couple of things that I've always kind of grounded myself in when talking about confidence. And I think a lot of it comes from Kate's work, but also the work of Russ Harris, who wrote The Confidence Gap, which is an amazing book if you haven't had a chance to read it. I think one thing is, like, we've got to know where we get our confidence from as an individual, like actually being aware of that. So preparation is one way we can build confidence because it allows us to kind of go, right, I've been there before. I know how to do this. This situation is very familiar. However, I think if we over-relied on preparation, that's going to make our confidence really shaky rather than being really robust. Because if we don't do that preparation, then suddenly we're walking into a situation where, like, I've not done my prep here. How am I gonna manage this? And we start to doubt ourselves. Whereas actually, if we can build those methods where we can have multiple sources of where we get our confidence from, that's going to stand us in really good stead. Because if we take one away, we've still got all the others. So, like, some of the things that you'll hear people talking about where they get their confidence from is things like having a close group around me, like actually knowing the coach or my boss has got my back. Because if I've got that, then I know that if I go out there and I do things in the right way, I know that in the sanctity of the dressing room or the office, I'm going to have their support. Things like past accomplishments, like actually even reflecting on things that I've done previously that have allowed me to get to where I am today. We in the UK, we use something called super strengths, like actually knowing that you've got something that sets you apart from everyone else. That's another source of confidence. So there's all these ways in which we can develop confidence. And I think it's about, first of all, knowing what your sources are, what are the things that you can do to build confidence. And then I think there's two myths that we need to walk past. One being that confidence is the absence of self-doubt, because it really isn't. Like, if you speak to anyone in the world, everyone's got that version of the voice in their head that's telling them that they're no good or they're not valued or what they're doing isn't good enough. Like, everyone's got that version. And that voice sometimes will be really loud. When you're feeling confident, it'll be really quiet, but it's always there in the background. And I think sometimes that sometimes it can be quite a helpful voice because it's basically telling us you need to work harder here. And that allows us to do the things that allow us to be really effective. On other times, it's not helpful at all. But recognizing what that voice is for you and recognizing that voice is not really real. It's not really valid. And actually, if I do those things that I know give me confidence, that voice is going to get quieter. So I think that's the first myth. And the second myth I would always speak to is that we need the feeling of confidence before we act. And actually, I always think it's the inverse. Like,
Yeah.
actually, we need to act to feel confident. So if we do things, as I say, do the things that make us feel confident, that's going to allow us to feel confident. If we sit and wait for the confidence to come until we do something that feels scary, we're going to be sat there for a very long time, because confidence is more of an emotion or a feeling that will come and go based on what's going on around us. It won't just happen. And if we're just waiting for it to happen, we're going to be waiting a long time to do the things that maybe scare us but are going to drive us towards where we want to go.
Yeah. Action orientation is a key aspect. There's a researcher here in the US, Steve Magnus, who studied Olympians and elite athletes for 18 plus years. And in his research, that was a key aspect that differentiated good athletes from exceptional athletes, was that they were oriented to action, to, even in the absence of a necessary plan or feeling confident, that they were motivated to move forward, and that they knew that they would figure it out on the way, or they would grow that confidence on the way. But they knew that the secret to success was movement, and action forward. And I love that you're also focusing on that. A lot of, similarly, I think not just confidence is generated through action, but motivation. Ironically, people think you have to be motivated before you act, but really it's just the process of acting then can drive that motivation and that commitment to a bigger goal. But you're right, having that bigger purpose, that bigger goal, that helps you direct your action, and that also is what helps you motivate and stay committed once you are in action towards that goal.
Yeah, I love that kind of comparison with motivation, because that is, again, that's a feeling. And if you're not feeling motivated one day, you can still be committed. And I think that's the difference between commitment and motivation. Commitment is very much even if I don't feel motivated, I'm still going to go and I'm still going to do that thing. And I think that's where a lot of my work, when I go back into sport and work with athletes, is very much on that values piece. Like, how do you want to be? And you'll often hear words like disciplined, committed, action orientated, all of those things. And no matter how we're feeling, we can still do those things, but we know things are going to get in the way. So actually, like, coming back to those things as our guiding star allows us then to kind of go, right, in this situation, how do I want to come across? Well, I know in this interview that I've got, or this meeting that I've got, I want to come across as X, Y, and Z, because they're really close to my own personal values. That allows you to be really effective. And I think sometimes if we don't know them, then we rely more on those emotional kind of components of performance, such as motivation, confidence, to guide us in where we go.
Yeah, I think in addition to just having those goals and thinking about how do I want to be, I think it's also very helpful to think about long-term aspects of who do I want to be,
Yeah.
and identifying, as you have, some core values, not just, I think X, Y, and Z is an important thing to be, but what are the core values that I want to embody that are going to help me achieve my goals? Things like integrity. I want to be a person of integrity. And what that means is I want to keep my promises not only to others, but to myself.
Yeah.
And understanding that that's who I want to be. That's a steady state. We might sometimes fall less than the exact perfection of integrity, but that's the goal. And having that to center who we want to be and how we want to be allows us to then move forward. Or having someone who I want to be an energetic person. I want to not just have energy in myself, but I want to light up others. That's who do you want to be? Or who do you want to be on the pitch? Do I want to be someone who sparks action or energy in my teammates or even in the office. How do I want to be? Do I want to be the calming voice? Do I want to be the energetic voice? And it can also be, what does the situation call for, right? Like we were talking before, does this moment call for providing calmness and thought, or does this moment call for generating energy and more risk taking through another thing I love to talk about is psychological safety.
Yeah.
That's really huge in terms of the team that you have around you, the supporters that you have around you, right? So when you feel psychologically safe to risk things, to try things with those around you, knowing that they're still going to support you, to have your back, even if your tries fall short, that just generates so much more trying more easily because you have that psychological safety with those people that support you. I wonder, how does that concept of psychological safety play into your work with teams and with executives?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that you make. Just going back to the kind of the values piece as well, I think having them allows you to focus more on the process rather than the result, because we know that the result is often not fully in our control. And so actually if we don't quite get the result, but we can kind of fall back on, what did I kind of live out who I want to be? And if we say yes, and actually we execute all those things, like it's a case of, right, let's go again, or let's learn from that experience, rather than kind of be really down on maybe not getting the results. So I think that's really, really important. The role of psychological safety, I think, is massive. Like it's huge. And like our work at MindFlick, we often get brought in to work with like lots of kind of really high performing teams, and on the surface, some of the world's best teams. And really what you're trying to do in those settings is help people understand each other and understand the strengths they bring so they can really leverage them, but then build the relationships and the trust in order to help people really be themselves. And we often use the metaphor of invisible ropes. So if you imagine you're sat in a dressing room or whatever it might be, or you've got a relationship with your coach, or you've got a team of people that you work with in the office, like imagine you're connected by these invisible ropes. There's a rope between you and everyone else. Some of those ropes would be really strong, and you know them really well. You get on, you can have really good conversations, you give them feedback, your performance is really, really good. Some of those ropes might be a bit weaker because actually you don't know that person so well. You don't know their history. They might be new into the team. You might have had an argument in the past that's kind of caused a little bit of friction. Like, and really what happens in teams is that when we're put under pressure, we can go one or two ways. We can either really come in and get around each other, support each other, get through the tough times together and come out the other side still performing, or we can get put under pressure. We almost test the rope out because we're kind of like, right, I need that rope now. You test it and it snaps because we've not invested in that relationship. And at that point, that's where teams start to move apart and we start to see the dysfunction that almost every team has. And also from an individual point of view, that then results in people feeling very isolated, very unsafe, not able to air their views. And therefore you see this underdone version of them where they kind of turn up, they middle through, they don't bring their strengths, and they certainly don't feel safe to adapt. And therefore you get that almost that underperformance. So I think when we think about psychological safety, I think it's massive. I think it needs to go checked because I think proper psychological safety also has accountability. And I think sometimes that gets a little bit misunderstood in different environments. They see it as a bit woolly because it's like, oh, it feels safe. No, it's not about that. It's actually a performance edge. And then it is really about trying to get round, build those relationships, proactively do that. So when we need it most, it's there. So it needs to be proactive. It needs to be something we're doing more and more often. And I think that's where we maybe fall down in the corporate environment, that we don't do that enough. We just focus on performing. Whereas in sport, we're focusing on that. How do we get better? How do we really tighten our ropes almost every day of the week?
I love that. I'll share another little tidbit from the fight world, from mixed martial arts about psychological safety, which seems weird to talk about it there in a violent sport. But my training partners, I'd call them my PFFs, my punch face friends.
Nice.
And you're developing psychological safety with your training partners, whose job during training is literally to punch you in the face or to kick you in the leg, to keep you accountable if you're lowering your defenses at the wrong time, and to help you get better. But ultimately, you start a training session with tapping gloves, you end it tapping gloves or with hugs. And they are there to hold you accountable, but they're also there in it with you and saying, look, you're free to try here. I'm going to try too. We're both going to try and make ourselves and each other better. But yeah, if you drop that lead hand again, I'm going to pop you, and we're going to be real punch face friends. And having that basis for psychological safety, where it's okay for us to try together, to fail sometimes, to get the better sometimes. The last thing that you'll see a fighter do before they walk into the cage by themselves is, you realize it's a team sport. They're hugging their coach. They're hugging their team members who walked out with them. They're reminding themselves of that psychological safety, so then they can take the risks that they need to take in that cage or in that ring. And so it's a funny thing. I'm glad you brought up accountability, because yeah, people think, oh, psychological safety, that's, we need to sit in a circle and sing songs together. It's not that. It's developing really that deep trust that someone will be there for you to lift you up, and also to tell you when you need to lift yourself up.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, the reason we build psychological safety is so we can have brilliant conversations around performance. Is that trust? Like, I know that if I was kind of walking down the street and someone turned around and punched me in the face, I'd be like, hang on, what's going on here? Because you don't know them. Whereas actually, like, when you're in your environment, in the kind of ring, or whether it's in a dressing room, like in a football dressing room, where you're giving each other feedback, where that feedback is coming from. It's because we all want to get better. We all want to perform. We all want to win medals. We all want to kind of achieve the goals that we've set out to do. And that's why we have those conversations. And I think it can be really easy for us to kind of mistake psychological safety for, actually, I'm not going to give someone that feedback because I'm not really sure how they're going to respond. And actually, I feel a little bit icky giving it myself because it's not really my comfort zone. And that to me suggests that we've got a friendly environment rather than a psychologically safe environment. Like, we're trying to protect people for fear of getting it wrong, rather than kind of going, you know what, I really need to give you this feedback, because when I do, it's going to help you get better. And I think that kind of the person that I always go back to in this kind of conversation with Brené Brown, like that, to be clear is to be kind. Yeah. Like, actually, if we're in an environment where we're being clear, we're giving feedback, and we're having the conversations for the right reasons in the right way, that's really, really important. I think sometimes in some settings, people do it because they want to keep other people down and they want to make themselves feel good. And that's obviously the wrong intention. But as long as the intention there and the environment there and the trust is there, I think it's really, really important.
Absolutely. I'd like to shift gears a little bit, particularly with how you get feedback. And some of the times feedback is analysis, and MindFlick has Spotlight, which is your platform. How was that profiling developed, and how does that differ from typical tools that someone might use?
Yeah, so there's loads of tools out there in the personality space. I know listeners probably thinking like they might have done Hogan, MBTI, DISC. There's loads and loads of tools out there. I guess the reason that we developed Spotlight is it's still a really new tool. We kind of first developed it 10 years ago. We wanted to create a tool that focused on 4 things that other tools didn't do. And I guess it came from our experiences of using profiling tools with some of these Olympic, Paralympic environments, professional sport, international cricket. Like, we were in these environments, and we noticed like some of the downsides of using psychometric tools, like some being that often it would lead to limitation of behaviors. So actually, I'm going to limit myself because that's not me. Like, I don't do that. I'm not a blue, so I'm not going to do the spreadsheets. That's ridiculous. So we wanted a tool that kind of downplayed that and actually looked more at the adaptability and the development of adaptability. If I recognize that I sit more over here, how do I step into that space when I need to? So that was one of the first bits of thinking. The second bit of thinking that we kind of wanted to go down the line was a lot of tools look at behavior, and they do that really, really well. And they kind of give some really familiarity with how I come across stylistically to other people. What most tools tend to neglect is mindset. And that's the key thing for us. Like, our experience in working with some of the highest performers in the world taught us that actually it's adaptability of mindset that allows you to stay at the top for longer. Like, if you don't do that, you're going to either win and then go downhill very quickly, or you're not going to get to the top in the first place. So that ability to adapt the way that you view the world and the way that you think is super, super key. And the third thing was we wanted the profile to be really, really performance driven and really kind of speak the language of the things we talked about today. So like in the profile, there's a chapter on confidence, there's a chapter on resilience, and it's all about like, how do I build that? How do I do that based on my natural kind of style? So that was the thinking behind the profile. And then how it's progressed over the last few years is then looking at, okay, so from an individual perspective, that's great. And there's now a mobile app that goes alongside the tool that kind of gives you these weekly nudges to kind of nudge you in the right direction, like that little coach on your shoulder. But also then in teams, how do we connect on more effectively? Like, how do we actually, if I'm working with someone who's hugely different to me, how do I make sure that I work in a way that gets the best out of them, and how can they work in a way that gets the best out of me, so we can almost build this mutual relationship that allows us to really perform. So that was the origin story, and I guess from sport it then went into the world of business, and we're now kind of using the tool in lots of different industries throughout finance, law, professional services, construction, education, through to some of the best sports teams in the world are still kind of using it.
That's amazing. So how have some organizations seen the impact from MindFlick and Spotlight? Was it increases in psychological safety or performance or communication? What have you seen?
Yeah, we've seen it used in so many different ways. I guess the first real use case for us was around leadership. So actually, how can we help people become better leaders and have better conversations with the people they lead? So that was kind of one thing that we really wanted to do. And we worked with a people leader over here in the UK and really kind of went in, right, what do you want? And it started with that question, like, what would success look like here? Like, what would success look like and how can we help you? And it went from a place of, you know what, we need to make our leaders better. And if we make our leaders better, then that's going to result in better levels of engagement. We're going to get more internal promotions in our company. So that was where we went with it, and we saw huge leaps. So we actually used Spotlight with the leaders, but what we saw was the teams that they were leading, they had it was something like a 27 spike in engagement across the board. So it was this massive thing that actually we're changing leadership behaviors here, and not just creating awareness. Like, that awareness is translating into people doing something different, because teams don't change, people do. It sounds so simple, but actually if we wait for things to change around us, that's not going to happen. We've got to be the one that does it. So that's one example. And then where we've shifted to is outside of leadership, is actually how do we create cultures that are psychologically safe, where we've got that mutual understanding of difference, where we're more inclusive, where we have really good conversations. That's the direction we've gone, both from an internal perspective, but also an external perspective. So actually using the frameworks that sit behind the tool to start thinking about, okay, I'm about to go into a meeting with a client or a key stakeholder. How could I adapt my style to where they are right now? Like, what do they need from me? And I think it gets you thinking less about kind of going on autopilot and more about just kind of identifying what is my natural approach, when does it work for me, because we always start with strengths. Like 80% of the time you can play to your strengths, but in the times where they don't work or they're not moving you towards where you want to go, like, what do you need? And then the frameworks that sit at the heart of the profile are all about that. So we've got the COPE framework, which describes mindset, and the FLEX framework, which looks more at behavior, and looking at which one of them do I maybe need to tweak in this moment to be the best version of me.
Fascinating. Do you think that's where performance psychology technology is heading, or might start developing? Is not only the ability to tell someone where are they now, but perhaps give them practice for adaptability in scenarios.
I hope so, yeah. And I genuinely think like the biggest problem with sports psychology or performance psychology, I think historically has been like there's no like we've been really bad at creating models or frameworks that people can understand. They tend to be very complex models of theory, and no one really knows how to use them. So I think like that's why we set off what we're going to do. And I think actually if we're going to help people, like we need to make things that are simple and sticky so people remember them and they can use them. And that was one of the things we wanted to do in kind of setting up MindFlick, was create basically make performance psychology more accessible to the masses, like get it out there, allow people to use the tools that this 1% of people at the very top of their discipline might be using. And actually, can we get it across more and more people who could get 10 to 20% better by employing some of these things? So I think that's definitely the direction. And I think the birth of things like AI, kind of digital technology, gives you more scope to get that thinking out to more and more people. I think the thing you've got to be mindful of is that we want to use technology in a way that furthers connection and develops people, rather than, I think sometimes what technology does is it actually pulls us away from the things that are important. So it's almost like, how do we reimagine those kinds of things as psychologists to get our message out there, but get people like use your phone in a way that's going to help rather than hinder. So you don't get stuck on social media. Actually, you get advice from it, and then it allows you to perform out there.
That's right. Pulling it as a tool to bring you back to real life rather than a substitute for
that's it.
Real life.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So how do you think, obviously, if listeners were to sign up with MindFlick, and be able to use Spotlight, that'd be one way for them to start building adaptability. How else could someone who's listening today start building adaptability as a sort of foundational high performance skill?
Yeah, so this is where my PhD thesis is going. So I'm currently writing it up as we speak, and the model that we've got to, basically there's 4 key skills that are the building blocks to adaptability. So one of them being self-awareness. So first of all, are you aware of your strengths? Do you know where they might hold you back a little bit? What are some of those development areas that you need? Do you feel confident in order to really excel in those settings? So that's kind of one of the building blocks. You've got emotional control. So actually in those tricky situations, can I stay in control of my emotions, really kind of still perform under pressure and manage that pressure effectively? There's definitely a component that sits alongside self-awareness that is around contextual awareness and actually being tuned into other people, being tuned into the situation and knowing what that needs. And then there's an act of doing, which is kind of that 4th building block. And most commonly, where we've spoken to leaders and coaches, that tends to be around interpersonal skills. So actually, can I form relationships with lots of different people? Can I influence in a really effective way? Can I step into those more challenging conversations? So those are kind of the skills that we've identified, which then feed into and come together to allow us to adapt when we take that moment to go, what does this situation need? Where am I going? What does this situation need? How can I get towards that goal? So those are kind of the primary things from a personal point of view. But I think if you look wider than that, what we've also found quite interestingly is things like trust and psychological safety being key. So actually the environment that we're in will affect whether we adapt or not. Things like values. So actually knowing what your values are. And what some of the values that have really come through around what helps us to adapt are values like humility, curiosity, tolerance. In fact, they were all kind of values that were cited in a study by NASA on adaptability, which is super cool. And interestingly, some values stop us from adapting. So I remember speaking to another gold medal winner who won gold in Rio, and they basically said, I would do anything to win apart from cheat. And actually, if I knew that adapting meant cheating, I wouldn't do it. I'd make a conscious choice not to do it because that's not me. And yeah, it might move me towards winning a game of hockey, but I'm not going to do it because that doesn't represent who I am. So that was a really, really interesting kind of caveat to the values piece as well. And then I think the other thing that came out was it was more around opportunity. And actually, most people that I've spoken to in that space have said the thing that helps me adapt in the moment is having that person in my corner who tells me to do it. Because actually, I get so sucked into the moment, I forget what I could do. And so actually having that person on the side of the pitch, in my corner of the ring, in the office, who just kind of gives me a nudge on the shoulder, like that's the thing that helps me to kind of get my head up and maybe do something a bit different.
I love that. It is, even when we feel like we're just individual contributors or, playing an individual support, the fact of the matter is that the people around us have such a huge impact on our ability to not only meet our potential, but even exceed the potential that we might have anticipated. So that's why you've got really high performance organizations that are perennial high performance organizations, regardless of the team, because when the structure is there, when the values are there, when you continue to operate in a way that provides that sort of support and safety and trust for high performers, you're going to get the best out of the high performers that join you. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
And I think just circling back to the conversation around frameworks, I think if there was one framework I was going to give around adaptability, particularly when you're trying to as a leader, I think in particular this resonates with, is a really simple thing of like, where am I? Where are they? Where do I need to be? Where do they need to be? And almost like following, it's something I've stolen from a head coach of a team over here, but that was his mantra. Like every time he went into a team talk or a one-to-one, it was always that process. Where am I right now? Where are they right now? Where do I need to be for this conversation to go really well? Where do they need to be after the conversation so I know it's a success? And I think that is another nice framework to kind of ground ourselves in as leaders if we're looking to adapt and really kind of support someone through challenges or even just to be their best.
I love that. Maybe even do that during the 7 seconds of pause.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Combine the two.
Where are they? Where do I need to be? Where do they need to be? Breathe and go. I love it. So, as you know, I have one special question that I like to ask all of my guests on the podcast. And I took it from Oprah, who got it from Gene Siskel, a film critic. But I think of it as the Oprah question now. And it is, what is one thing that you know for sure? It could be anything about psychology, anything about life, anything about sport. But what is one thing that you know for sure, Liam?
I think the one thing that I know is that no one can go it alone. I think anyone who's got to the top of their field has always had to have at least one person in their corner. It's often more than one. But it goes back to a lot of the things that we've touched upon. I think actually having that support network around us, having the people that can give us that feedback at the right moment and know how to get the best out of us, whether that be a partner, a coach, a colleague, a parent, whatever it looks like. I think that's super, super important. And I think often we make the assumption that to be a high performer, we have to do it on our own. We've got to do it without anyone else's help. And therefore we forget to ask for help. But actually, the people who get to the top and stay at the top are the ones with people in their corner. They've got that support network. It doesn't have to be a big one, but actually they've got people around them that can really make a difference at the right times. So I think that's the one thing for me would be, you've got to have someone in your corner. Otherwise, it's going to be a long struggle.
I love it. It reminds me also of the Jamie Tart character arc on Ted Lasso, going from someone who thought that they were an island to realizing that they're so much better as part of a team, and a team of people that believe in them.
That's it. And I think it comes back to, just to throw one more kind of reference in, we always talk about a psychologist called Margaret Mead. And she's an amazing person, but she always said that it's amazing how a small committed group of people can come together to do such remarkable things. And I think like that is something that I always come back to thinking about teams. Like actually that's quite a nice, powerful quote to come back to. Actually, we are more than the sum of our parts. And as long as we remain committed and we all move in the right direction and we're all there for the right reasons, we can do some things that are pretty special.
Love it. I love it. I might steal that for the title of the episode, that we are more than the sum of our parts.
Nice. I love it. I love
beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time so generously with me and the listeners here today, Liam. If someone wanted to contact you or get in touch with you or MindFlick, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yeah, the best way is to either connect on LinkedIn. We're kind of there. We've got a company page as well if you want to kind of see what we do at MindFlick and learn a little bit more about us. Or I'll kind of fire my email across, Jess, and it's simply liam@mindflick.co.uk without the simply. It's liam@mindflick.co.uk, and you can just reach out, and I'd love to kind of carry on the conversation with anyone who's interested.
Wonderful. I will make sure I'll have those links in the show notes too for everyone.
Amazing.
Thank you again so much, Liam. It's been such a pleasure to get to dive deeply with you. And thank you so much for your colleagueship as well. I've been really enjoying learning more about what you're studying and what you're doing.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a really, really cool conversation. And yeah, I'm sure it won't be the last.
Cheers. That's a wrap. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Legal Athlete Podcast. If today's episode fired you up or gave you something to train with, hit follow, leave a review, and share it with a fellow high achiever who's ready to raise their game. Want to bring this energy to your team, firm, or event? Or are you ready to train for your next high-stakes moment with me directly? Click the link in the show notes to connect. I'm Jess Sargus, and I coach the bold, lawyers, leaders, and anyone ready to lead their life with fierce agency. Green light. Let's go.